program that deals with current events and things of politic. Many times, a lot of the frustration that I hear from you when you call in here, and a lot of our guests, centers around basically the idea that we are functioning with either people in government or a government as a whole that is virtually out of control. I can't tell you how many times my emails and my texts say, what are we going to do? How can we fix this? We have a government that doesn't care. We have a government that doesn't listen to us. We have a government that doesn't respond. We have a government that doesn't even pay attention to its own constitution. Is there nothing we can do? Well, let's find out. Mark Meckler is president of Citizens for Self-Governance, and they are an organization that is dealing with the idea I told you about a moment ago, the Convention of States project. He's been involved a lot as a Tea Party patriot, but now he is fully ensconced in Citizens for Self-Governance. So let's ask him the question, and we'll bring him up. First of all, Mark Meckler, welcome to the program, sir.
Thanks. It's great to be with you.
Mark, you've heard me just say what a lot of my emails say and what a lot of my texts say from our listeners. I know you travel the country and you hear from all over. We're not unique in Northeast Indiana, are we? People are very frustrated with governance.
You're unique in that you're nicer than most people in the country, but no, you're not unique in your frustration.
They sense that not only is the government gotten so big, but people really have a sense, I think, Mark, that the government has gotten big and that it has turned on the electorate, that the government has turned against us, and now we no longer have a government that holds the Constitution in one hand and our well-being in the other, but we actually have a government that doesn't even pay attention to the Constitution, and they don't answer to the people.
I think that's true, and I might even take it one step further. In the recent Lois Lerner decision by the DOJ is a perfect embodiment of this. We have a government that's actually now the enemy of the people and actually sees the people as its enemy. We're living in a time which is extraordinary where the government actually can designate people as political dissidents and then begin attacking us with state power. That's what we're seeing today in America.
You know, this might be the wrong microcosm to bring out as an illustration, but last week we heard the former Secretary of State talk about, the fact of the video, and it wasn't the video, and whether it was terrorism that caused everything that happened in Benghazi. At the same time that she's telling people by private emails, we know it was Al-Qaeda. We know this is what it was. We know that it was organized. It was planned. At the same time, she's lying to people, even family members across flag-draped caskets, telling them a completely different story. And I don't know why we're shocked, Mark, because sometimes that's the way our government treats us, regardless of the subject matter.
And I want to say it fairly, regardless of the party. I mean, this is one of the problems, is we can be partisan, we can blame it on the Democrats, and certainly in Benghazi we can blame on Hillary Clinton. But the fact is, the government in general, especially the large federal bureaucracy, views us as the enemy, doesn't view us as somebody that they serve. I just saw an amazing statistic now. Federal government employees make 72% more than their private sector counterparts. So They are entitled, they're getting rich off of us, essentially they're drinking our blood in and out on a daily basis, and they don't want to give up any of that power.
Mark, 4 times a year I have the great honor to ride with veterans on a jet, and we go to Washington, D.C. for an honor flight that goes from Northeast Indiana. But the one thing that always takes me back, I see the White House and the Capitol building. We go to Arlington. It's very moving. The World War II memorial, the memorial for Vietnam and for Korea. It's all stunning, and it all has great meaning. But there's a part of the trip where we take a bus tour through downtown Washington, and it's like you find yourself saying, okay, how many buildings do we need to build? How big does this thing need to get? It is absolutely unbelievable what's there. And then you find out how much the federal government owns across the country, and they have just this ravenous appetite to suck in more and more and more, and yet the states seem to be diminishing and lessening and lessening and lessening. And when I read my Constitution, Mark, it seems to me that is in abject reverse of the promise and the premise put forward by our Constitution.
It's absolutely in reverse. And in fact, the founders would be appalled, and they'd be, frankly, to be fair, they'd be appalled with us. And the reason they'd be appalled with us, the people, is because they intended for us to protect the Constitution, really not the other way around, and we failed to do so. They gave us the mechanism, and we've just failed to utilize the mechanism.
And, Mark, one thing that I find sad, and I gave a presentation to a group about a week ago, and I said, to me, it is a very sad commentary that I find for the first time that when we turn around, you and I, and we hand this nation off to the next generation, for the first time in over 2.5 centuries of history in this place, in this democratic republic, I really truly believe that we are going to hand a country to the next generation coming up that will be less a country than what we were given. And that's never happened before.
It's never happened before, and I don't think, you and I have enough years left that we don't have to let that happen. We have to fight against that trend. And again, we've been given the tools to do it. The question is, do we have the stomach for it?
Well, let's do that. Let's talk about that. I'm going to slip away for a very short break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask Mark Meckler, our special guest today, questions. I want to know, what is Article 5? Where does the 17th Amendment come into play of all this? And is this all really possible? Look, Mark's not alone. There are heads of law departments at great universities, law professors, and even people the likes of Mark Levin that have signed into this whole idea, and they say, not only will this work, this must work. Mark, can you hang on with me?
Absolutely.
We'll come back to Mark in just a moment, and we will talk to him. What is the problem, and how do we fix it? Tell us what Article 5 is. It happens straight ahead here on the Pat Miller Program on News Talk 1190 WOWO 92.3 FM.
The Pat Miller Program on News Talk 1190 WOWO 92.3 FM.
Hey, welcome back. I want to get right back to the Newsmaker line and talk to our guest again, Mark Meckler. And again, Mark, thank you for being with us today, sir.
Still glad to stick around with you.
We got a lot of stuff to cover here in short time. Let me just ask you now, if you and I are not done by the bottom of the hour, are you open to me holding you for one more segment?
Absolutely.
Okay. One of the things that I think is being done here is Article 5. And a lot of people may not understand Article 5. It's part of the Constitution. It's not something that's from outer space or anything. Tell us what Article 5 is, because it's a remedy when you have a government gone awry. Sure.
It's actually the remedy that the founders gave us. And most of your listeners will be familiar with the term federalism. And Article 5, the second clause of Article 5, is actually the ultimate federalist remedy. Founders put this in the Constitution 2 days before the end of the Constitutional Convention. James Mason from Virginia stood and noted that they had a severe deficiency in the Constitution as drafted. The men had given the power to the federal government to propose amendments to the Constitution should they deem it necessary, but they forgot to give that power to the people acting through the states. And Mason asked this question. He said, are we so naive that we really believe that a federal government that exceeds its bounds and becomes a tyranny will propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? Mm-hmm. And Pat, the answer to that question is obvious. That's never happened in human history. It'll never happen. It takes the people to restrain a tyranny. And so Mason proposed that we put in the second clause of Article 5, which gives us, the people, the power acting through our state legislatures, to call a convention to restrain the tyranny of the federal government. And that position was so wise and so obvious to the founders who were present. Madison's notes reflect there was no debate, and they unanimously gave us that power. So today what we're doing through the Convention of States project is we're giving that power a chance. We're working with Article 5, the second clause. We're out there calling out for an amending convention, a convention for proposing amendments, to be called by 34 states. Florida, Georgia, Alaska, and Alabama have already adopted this resolution in both houses. It's been introduced in 38 states, including there in Indiana.
Right.
So there's incredible momentum nationally for this project right now.
Well, and it's one of the two remedies, because the other remedy is the fact that if two-thirds of both of the houses of Congress call for it, but if they don't, then you do it through two-thirds of the states, which is what you're proposing to do now. In other words, out here where we, the people, are, it's time we get our voices heard, and it's time we get this done. And as a precaution, and again, the wisdom of the Constitution never ceases to amaze me. You need two-thirds of the states to call for this. If they decide to come up with some kind of amendment, it takes three-fourths to ratify it. So it can't be any fly-by-night, fuzzy-headed idea that just came and went, like a wish in a pan or something. I mean, this is real, deep, considered, thoughtful resolution for any problems you might have. And I think anybody listening would say, if we've ever been at a point in time that we need this, we're sitting in it right now.
We are, and the counter question is, if not this, then what? If not now, then when? I mean, the founders told us point blank we'd get to the point where the federal government became a tyranny. This is the way it goes in all of human history, and frankly, every republic in history has fallen due, at least initially, to financial problems, overspending, overextending themselves. That's where we're at today. You know, Pat, about 80% of Americans say that we need a balanced budget amendment. About 80% of Americans say that we need some sort of term limits. 72% of Americans say the federal government is too big and does too much. And Congress will never propose legislation to restrain its terms, restrain its spending, impose fiscal balance on the country. Only we, the people, can do it, and this is the method the founders gave us.
What do we do with it? Isn't this really our only alternative? Because, I mean, when you're relegated where we've gotten to a point where the monster has gotten bigger than the scientists that created it, things have gotten so big and so large. If you walk up to almost anybody on Capitol Hill today and you quoted Article 10 to them of the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people, they would look at you, nod, and go, yep, and then say, well, then let's go back inside the dome here and let's legislate and get back to this. And it would be, well, we can't do that.
And to be fair to some of these guys, the problem isn't just legislative. The problem is the Supreme Court. And over the last 115 years, the Supreme Court has taken the Constitution and twisted it and shredded and bent it into something that the founders wouldn't recognize. You know, your listeners are familiar with the Constitution that you and I know and love, but that Constitution no longer exists in our government today. That Constitution is under glass in the National Archives. The Constitution we must live under is the one as interpreted by the Supreme Court. And if you want to fix bad Supreme Court interpretation, well, there are two ways. And one way is simply to wait and to pray a lot and to hope that you get a great president who puts in great justices who stay true to their values and who maybe over the next 100 years can do some work to reverse the trends that we've seen over the last 100 years. Or we can do what the founders gave us. When the country gets out of control, we resort to Article 5 and we reassert our power as the people.
Let me ask you a question that you and I have not discussed, but it's one that I think needs to get rectified. Is there some discussion, a lot of discussion, or no discussion in your organization or in the meetings that you participate in that we need to go in and undo Article 17 and get back to Article 1, Section 3 with regards to how it is that senators are selected for our country? Because I believe that's what set us up for a lot of the problem and disjointed governance we have today.
Sure. I want to step back a bit for your listeners who don't know what that means exactly. So the 17th Amendment provided for the direct election of our United States senators by the populations of the states. And that's contrary to what the founders ever expected. The founders set the system of governance up so that our state legislatures would appoint and certify and put those senators in Washington, D.C. And there was a reason. The reason is that a senator really had one primary job when they went to Washington, D.C. in the time of the founders and for a long time afterwards. That was the power to say no. Mm-hmm. In other words, the federal government would encroach on state powers, and the senators were supposed to say, no, you can't do that. We won't allow that. Our states won't allow that. And in 1913, unfortunately, along with some other bad stuff that happened in the Wilson era, we ratified the 17th Amendment, which says that those senators are now directly elected. And what that means is those senators became federal employees, and their incentives as human beings are to draw power to Washington, D.C., not keep it in the states. So the question is, can we repeal the 17th Amendment? And the answer is yes. And I think we should, frankly. It broke the balance really badly. I would say from a public perception perspective, it's a stretch. But I think if I could wave my magic wand and make one amendment get repealed that could help restore the balance, it would be repealing the 17th Amendment.
Well, when you look at the Senate, when you realize, and not every problem that we suffer from today, but for example, the problem that we have with the Supreme Court, who is it that approves those justices to be there? It's the Senate. Why is it we can't sometimes impeach those who are belying their office and functioning unconstitutional, even if the House brings up articles of impeachment? Because he gets tried where? In the Senate. Who is it that every time we have good, solid laws that come out of the United States House of Representatives, they can't seem to see the light of day? Why? You can't get them through the Senate. And when senators were appointed by the states, through the state legislators, and not elected by the public, they still had 6-year terms in office, but But because your local legislature is such a closely bound unit to the people locally, I mean, you can put your hands out and touch your local representative in your state government. Because of that, those people, when you let them know that things aren't right, and when they see that enough and when they sense it enough, they could yank a guy back from Washington.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that's what they were intended to do. And look, they were trying to fix a perceived problem. The problem back in the early 1900s with the Senate was that the general public felt that the Senate was corrupt, felt that the only way to become a senator was to be a rich, connected person with wealth and connections. Were able to get these senatorial appointments. And obviously, you know, we fixed that. Oh, wait, we didn't fix that with the 17th Amendment.
Yeah.
We still have the same problem.
Exactly the same problem.
And so we didn't fix the problem, and we created a lot of unintended consequences. So, yeah, I'd love to see the 17th Amendment repealed.
Okay, coming up on the news break, so we're going to have our good friend stand by here, Mark Meckler, and he is heading up the Conventions of States project, and we want to talk to him just a little bit more. I want to talk to him about what you can do. If you're out there listening, you're going, this sounds great. A constitutional way to fix our constitutional problems, to yank our federal government back down to size, and to get things in proper order. What am I supposed to do here in Fort Wayne, Indiana? We'll ask Mark right after the news for number 10. Let's get back to our special guest. And Mark, first of all, sir, thank you very much for your patience. Mark, are you there?
I am, no problem at all.
Okay, good. Thank you for your patience, sir. I know that news break is really long. I tried to shut Tom down earlier, but you know how news guys are. Once they start, you're just not going to stop them. Let me bring up a couple of points. You and I've talked a lot here. We've crammed a lot in a couple of short segments. The problem of an overreaching government. Let me share with you some of the fears that I get from people through emails and texts when we start having these conversations, and then you deal with it and see if you can set their fears aside.
Got it.
If we open up something like this, some type of constitutional convention, what's going to happen is, what are you going to do if it ends up that somebody introduces something that doesn't just deal with the 1 or 2 or 3 areas that you originally planned to take care of, but what if they open up the balance where they can go in and start processing changes to the entire Constitution?
Sure, and there are always 1 or 2 people in any audience. I've spoken in 30 states around the country. There's always 1 or 2 that ask this question. And that sort of fear-based questioning comes primarily from a group called Eagle Forum and from the John Birch Society. And where it comes from them is really important to remember, is it comes from a letter from Chief Justice Warren Burger to Phyllis Schlafly of the Eagle Forum. And basically, Burger says he worries about a runaway convention. Mm-hmm. Burger was specifically worried about a runaway convention because 14 states had proposed amendments to overturn Roe versus Wade, his decision, his court's decision. He didn't like the fact that the people were going to reassert their control, so he wanted to put that fear out, and specifically he wanted to put it out into conservative circles and help us to eat our own and prevent the only remedy that we had from happening. So here's the bottom line in the whole thing. Remember, a convention is just for proposing amendments. These are suggestions by the states. They go out to 3/4 of the states have to ratify. The math is really important. So here's how the math works. If 3/4 of the states have to ratify, that means only 13 states required to stop any proposed amendment. So I want you to think about this and do the math in your head. You've got to be crazy if you could believe this is going to happen, but you have to believe, in order to believe you could have a runaway convention, that the 13 most conservative states in the United States of America, and the 13 most conservative houses in those states, would vote to restrict your liberties, would vote to repeal the Second Amendment, would vote to restrict your freedom of religion. You have to believe that the 13 most conservative states would vote for that, because it takes only 13 states to stop anything.
Well, and if that would happen, if that's where we are, we're done anyway.
Well, if that's where we are, then you ought to get off the radio. I ought to quit doing politics, and we ought to go hide. And we're not anywhere close to that. In fact, today, 31 states have both houses controlled by Republican majorities, if you include the Nebraska Unicam. You have the largest number of houses controlled by Republicans since the 1930s, and the smallest number of Democrats in state legislatures by number since the Civil War.
Wow. So basically, if you are a conservative, and if you, even more than being a Republican, but if in fact you are a conservative, this is a great idea, and the time has never been better than now.
The time's never been better than now, and frankly, you guys are doing a good job there in Indiana. You have an incredible sponsor in the in the Senate, and Senator Holdman is your sponsor. I had a chance to meet him there in Fort Wayne a week or so ago. Really staunch conservative. He was on the Article 5 bandwagon before I knew what it was. He is a fantastic, fantastic guy. You know, your holdup right there, there, and I'll call the person out by name. You got Senator Glick is a real problem, and she voted against this in the last session. She won't respond to her constituents. She won't meet with our representatives so that we can find out what she's doing. And frankly, what she's acting like is the kind of tyranny that we're trying to put down in Washington, D.C. She's unresponsive to her constituents.
Yeah, and even if I think, and I'm not a representative in government, but if I were, I would like to think that even if I had a position personally that's diametrically opposed to some people in my constituency, that I would at least have the courtesy to sit down and find out what it is they're saying. What are their fears? What are their concerns? What do they view as the remedy? And at least talk to them. But this, covering your head and running and hiding, I don't get it.
No, I don't get it. And again, it's tyranny is what it is. It shows a total disrespect for your constituents. So I would say here on the radio, I would encourage Senator Glick, step up to the plate, take the calls from your constituents, meet with our representatives, explain to us why you voted the way you did. Let us try and answer your concerns and have a civil dialogue. Treat your constituents like what they are, your bosses. These are the folks that put you in office, and you have an obligation to sit down with them and hear them out. Exactly.
We're talking to Mark Meckler, and he, of course, is the president of Citizens for Self-Governance, and really a driving force in this Article 5 presentation and project going forward. Mark, I appreciate your time today. Our last question that I have for you. You obviously believe, as do I, that this is the constitutional way to do this. This is the better way to deal with this. If, in fact, there is a problem, this is the way to deal with it. My question to you, sir, is, I guess, twofold. Do you really think it happens? And number two, for the people listening today, and we've got thousands listening to this program right now, what is the best thing for the average person listening if they say, this makes a lot of sense? That, at least let's sit down, let's have a convention, let's look and see what it is in our government that's not functioning constitutionally. Let's get back to it. What can the average person listening to you and me right now, what can they do?
Well, here's what they can do. They can go to conventionofstates.com. They can sign up. They can get involved. It's going to happen. You know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen. Mark Levin, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, Sarah Palin, Huckabee, Jindal, all these folks are on board. Senator Tom Coburn. We're going to make it happen. But it is up to the people there in Indiana to make it happen there. They should get with Senator Glick, have her have the meeting with us. They should support Senator Holdman, and they should go to conventionofstates.com.
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt. Even if they've heard names and they say, well, I don't need to call that one because I know that guy's for it. There's nothing wrong with calling that representative too and saying, hey, just wanted to take a minute. Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for standing for the right thing. That helps too. But yeah, you're right. People, for example, in Senator Glick's area, need to get a hold of her and say, you need to be listening. Listen, Mark Meckler, thank you so much for your time today, sir. I am sure this will not be our last discussion together, and I appreciate very much your taking time with the people of Northeast Indiana today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Mark Meckler. And he, of course, is, as we said, the president of Citizens for Self-Governance, which is the parent organization of this Convention of States project. You need to look at this. You need to go to conventionofstates.com and find out what's going on. And if you say, I don't know, this all sounds just get your Constitution out. A lot of you have pocket constitutions. Back when I said, do you want a free one? Hundreds of you said yes. I've mailed out hundreds of pocket constitutions. Get online. Just go to Google or go to Bing or whoever you do and type in Article 5 and just read Article 5 of the Constitution. It's not long, but just read it. Everything that's being suggested here is exactly what is in Article 5 of the Constitution. More of the Pat Miller program comes up soon. First of all,